On January 20, 1973, one of Africa's foremost anti-colonial leaders, Amílcar Cabral, was assassinated in Conakry, Guinea at the age of 48 by political rivals, allegedly supported by the Portuguese colonial government. Cabral not only led the War of Independence that toppled Portuguese rule in Guinea-Bissau and Cape Verde, but he also influenced the fight for decolonization across the continent of Africa. This firebrand politician, revolutionary, and Pan-African was born on 12 September 1924 in the town of Bafata in Portuguese Guinea, now called Guinea-Bissau. Both his parents were from Cape Verde, and his father came from a wealthy family. Amilcar's mother was a shop owner and hotel worker who worked hard in order to support her family, especially after she separated from his father by the year 1929. Now, let me paint the picture of the country that young Amílcar Cabral grew up in. Portuguese Guinea, as you can tell from the name, was under Portuguese colonial rule. Even though it was a very poor nation, Portugal made it known that it did not see self-rule, let alone full independence, as an option for this territory. Portugal was hell-bent on holding on at almost any cost. As with the other Portuguese colonies, advance for the African majority had been minimal. The practical outcome of Portuguese rule was that there was one doctor for every 100,000 Africans, only 300 hospital beds, with almost all of them being in the capital of Bissau. To add to this dire state of affairs, there was a minimal supply of nurses and midwives. On the education front, only 1% of the population was considered literate, and in the only government secondary school, about 60% of the pupils were Europeans. This was a bleak picture. By 1960, only a total of 14 Africans had acquired graduate status as assimilated Portuguese in Portugal. These assimilated Portuguese, or assimilados, were African subjects of the Portuguese colonial empire who had reached a level of civilization according to Portuguese legal standards that theoretically qualified them for full rights as Portuguese citizens. Amílcar Cabral was one of them. Because of his intelligence and a combination of hard work and luck, he became one of a handful of young Africans sent off to Lisbon for university training by the white rulers of Portuguese Guinea. While in Lisbon, Amílcar Cabral helped to found an association of Lusophone African students that included future Angolan President Agostinho Neto. Cabral and some of his fellow African students started developing political theories regarding colonialism and liberation for the Africans. For him, these were the formative years that birthed a political awakening for the young man. After graduating in 1950, Cabral was employed by the Portuguese colonial authorities as an agronomist. In the early 1950s, he traveled widely in Portuguese Guinea in order to conduct a survey of the land and its resources, which provided him with the opportunity to interact with people from various cultures who lived within the colony. Parallel to his study of the agrarian, social, and economic structures of Portuguese Guinea, he created the African People's Sports and Leisure Association. This was in 1954. However, the association was banned by the colonial authorities, and Cabral was exiled to a sugarcane plantation in Angola with permission to visit his family once a year. Now, as a graduate agronomist, he could have settled comfortably into the colonial service as a successful assimilado. Instead, Amílcar Cabral wasn't content with maintaining the status quo. He realized that Portugal would never move beyond the assimilado window dressing to grant Africans in Portuguese Guinea the right to self-determination and independence. So during one of his visits to the country, on September 19, 1956, Cabral and 5 other Cape Verdeans, including Aristide Pereira, the future president of Cape Verde, Luís Cabral, who was his half-brother, and Fernando Fortes, created the African Party for Independence, which was later renamed to the African Party for Independence of Guinea and Cape Verde, the PAIGC. This organization developed into a well-organized countrywide movement run by a central committee of which Amílcar Cabral was the Secretary General. And here's the philosophy that underpinned Cabral and his organization's struggle for independence. And I quote, "The struggle for independence is not only in order to get a flag and an anthem. Independence means something. In our own case, for us, the means to radically change the economical, social, and cultural situation of our African people. We fight against colonialism because colonialism is the first obstacle. We are not against the Portuguese, we are against Portuguese colonialism because it means humiliation and exploitation. Our people are considered like animals. Well, given Portugal's rigid attitude towards its colonial empire, a violent uprising in Portuguese Guinea seemed inevitable. Amílcar Cabral's PAIGC was the organization that eventually launched and spearheaded an armed struggle to liberate Portuguese Guinea. In 1959, the workers of the port of Bissau gathered in a general uprising against the colonial government. A shootout ensued which resulted in the death of 58 civilians. This event surprised the leaders of the PAIGC who had considered it possible to attain independence without armed conflict, as had been the case with the English and French colonies south of the Sahara. In turn, Amílcar Cabral returned to Bissau, and during a meeting held on September 19, 1959, the leaders of the PAIGC decided to engage the rural masses and start an armed offensive. The group led by Rafael Barbosa, Aristide Pereira, and Fernando Fortes remained in charge of expanding the influence of the party in the countryside, while the group with Cabral, Carlos Correia, and Francisco Mendes went to Conakry in neighboring Guinea to establish a party school. Here, Amílcar Cabral taught history, geography, and international relations, and at the same time engaged in intense diplomatic negotiations to obtain arms for the movement. However, the Portuguese would adamantly refuse a peaceful transition to independence. In 1960, with permission from Ghanaian President Kwame Nkrumah, Amílcar Cabral established military training camps in Ghana for the PAIGC guerrilla forces. Cabral and his organization's members emphasized Pan-Africanism and the importance of building a rural nationalist movement that could give rise to a stable independent state. By July 1961, guerrilla units started making raids against administrative and military targets in the northwest of the country, forcing the Portuguese to deploy troops to guard such targets. In August of the same year, from Conakry in neighboring Guinea, Cabral formally announced that the PAIGC was resorting to armed struggle, and from that time onwards, they mounted constant attacks against administrative and military targets, obliging Portugal to send military reinforcements to the territory. As early as 1962, the PAIGC held elections inside the territory in which 52,000 people out of the total population of less than 500,000 voted to back the PAIGC. Also, in a major boost of confidence for the movement, they obtained the backing of the OAU as well as full support from neighboring Guinea, which at the time was under the leadership of Ahmed Sékou Touré. By 1963, the Portuguese had started to admit that the PAIGC had infiltrated 15% of the countryside. The organization intensified the armed struggle in 1964 when it formed its military wing, while its guerrillas were sent for training to the Soviet Union, China, Cuba, Algeria, Senegal, Ghana, and neighboring Guinea. On a visit to London in April of 1965, Amílcar Cabral claimed that 40% of Portuguese Guinea was in the PAIGC's hands, despite the Portuguese downplaying the extent of the PAIGC's success. In fact, the PAIGC became the most accomplished of all the anti-colonial movements in Portuguese territories, including Angola and Mozambique. This was primarily because it performed best to motivate the rural population politically, was able to defend the liberated areas from counter-insurgency campaigns, and had the capacity to secure international support for its cause. However, I have to state that unlike Angola and Mozambique, the PAIGC had a small country and a small, more cohesive population in which to organize and operate. This made mobilization efforts way easier. Amílcar Cabral and the PAIGC's struggle wasn't all about taking arms against the enemy. They made it a point to improve the standards of living in the areas they liberated. To this end, they placed great emphasis upon education and established educational programs in all the liberated areas. During the years of 1965 to 1966, the PAIGC had established 127 primary schools operated by 191 newly trained teachers, and in the schools there were a total of 13,000 pupils. Some 50 young men and women were sent to Europe in 1967 for technical training in a variety of fields. Several printed books supplied by the PAIGC staff were available for use, and others were being prepared for publication. All of this was a considerable achievement for the liberation movement of such a small country while engaged in an all-out war. Meanwhile, Portugal's two island territories, the Cape Verde Islands and São Tomé and Príncipe, hadn't been involved in any actual liberation struggle as such. They were too small, and in the case of Cape Verde, too tightly controlled by the Portuguese, while São Tomé and Príncipe was a closed society entirely dependent upon a plantation economy. However, there were close ties between Cape Verde and Portuguese Guinea, and as the war in Portuguese Guinea intensified, Portuguese repression of nationalist activities in Cape Verde became more ruthless. Even so, the PAIGC enjoyed overwhelming support from the people of the islands to form an independent government with Guinea-Bissau. But the Portuguese were not going to go down without a fight. 1968 was a turning point in the war. Portuguese President Amilcar Cabral visited Portuguese Guinea in February of that year and insisted that the country would remain one of the sacred portions of national territory. In May of the same year, General António de Spínola was made Governor General of the territory. As governor, General de Spínola declared that subversive war against the PAIGC would not be won by military force only, and so he launched a campaign for a better Guinea. In this regard, General de Spínola opened 160 schools in strategic villages and made promises to the opponents of the PAIGC. However, by 1969, the PAIGC claimed to control 2/3 of Guinea's area and 45% of the population. So General de Spínola was desperate to stabilize the military front for the Portuguese forces. This is why they undertook operations such as the attempt to assassinate Ahmed Sékou Touré, the then president of neighboring Guinea. This was in 1970. This attack occurred on 22 November 1970, and Guinea was subjected to a mini-invasion in an attempt to overthrow the regime of Sékou Touré. Over the 2 days of fighting, considerable damage was done to Conakry, the capital. Sékou Touré's presidential palace was destroyed, as were the headquarters of the PAIGC. But all of this did not kill the morale of Amílcar Cabral and his forces. By the end of the year, the PAIGC claimed to have killed 1,700 Portuguese soldiers, destroyed 200 military vehicles, 60 boats, 10 aircraft, and taken 24 prisoners. Only in 1971, after nearly 10 years of fighting, did Portugal finally admit that a state of war existed in Portuguese Guinea, by which time 30,000 Portuguese troops were facing 7,000 Guinean guerrillas. Cabral was also busy on the diplomatic offensive. His speeches and writings were widely published, with printings in England and the Soviet Union, among other countries. In 1970, Cabral and the PAIGC delegation were granted an audience with Pope Paul VI to garner support for the revolution. In 1972, Amílcar Cabral spoke at the 163rd session of the Security Council of the United Nations, asking for an observation delegation to assess the conflict between Portugal and the PAIGC forces. Cabral and his team were truly making great strides in their fight for independence. After significant military victories in 1972, Cabral began formal preparations for an independent Guinea. But as all of this was taking place, Amílcar Cabral always knew that he was a marked man. He knew his life was in constant danger. In an interview he had once given, he described a failed attempt on his life, and I quote, "The Portuguese tried to kill me even in Conakry. They sent troops to Conakry to invade the Republic of Guinea, and the elite of the Portuguese troops were ordered to attack my house. They destroyed part of my house, but fortunately, they did not kill my wife and my children." Well, on 20 January 1973, Amílcar Cabral, the PAIGC leader, was assassinated in Conakry in the Republic of Guinea. Cabral was shot dead outside his tree-shaded, two-storied house in Conakry. In this instance, a disgruntled former PAIGC rival by the name Inocencio Cani, together with another member of the PAIGC, shot and killed Amílcar Cabral on that fateful day. They were believed to be working with the Portuguese agents. It is said that Cabral's assassination was part of a broader attempt to establish a PAIGC leadership that was more conciliatory towards the Portuguese. Fortunately, the PAIGC survived the crisis that followed Amílcar Cabral's death. And on 24 September 1973, the PAIGC declared the country independent as Guinea-Bissau. The new state was at once recognized by a majority of OAU countries and then by a majority of United Nations members, including the Soviet Union and China. On 2 November 1973, the United Nations General Assembly voted to recognize the Republic of Guinea-Bissau. Portugal finally recognized Guinea-Bissau's independence on 10 September 1974 and by the end of October had withdrawn all its military forces. The president of the new country until 1980 was Luis Cabral, the brother of Amílcar. Amílcar Cabral made a fundamental contribution to the future of his country by carefully building a widening base of political education, creating consciousness amongst the peasants so that they could become the engine of the revolution. His visionary leadership of the PAIGC welded the people of Guinea-Bissau into a tremendous fighting force. Indeed, his life and activities became a perpetual source of inspiration to revolutionary socialist and national independence movements across the continent of Africa. Don't forget to like and share the video if you enjoyed it. Thank you all for tuning in. This has been Tatenda for African Biographics. Until next time, cheers. Have a good one.